you want me to take those up?
No, I'm gonna okay. Tape them. Oh yeah, you can help with taping them. I thought you said take them up.
No, tape them. Okay, yeah, I'll do that. Okay.
Okay. Put this a bit down. Welcome back. We before we start talking about surveys, that's what we wanted to do for most of this session. As I said, I did program these beacons to also to capture the contact patterns as well. I explained a bit what I did while since previous session.
Well,
it didn't take 1 hour. It would have been faster to program these 10 beacons. It took half an hour to convince Nate to leave me alone. But it would be a bit faster
well
otherwise.
spoken.
Yeah. So we had here, I believe, 10 of these beacons and one of this kind that uses a AA battery. It's the same technology, but this one uses AA battery and lasts longer. So I thought we can leave this in this room. That's why I added to this as the last item here. Sorry, that's the last one written S320. That's the room that we are at. The label that I assigned to this one is just for clarity, to make sure that I know this beacon is supposed to stay here. As I said, I just so the setting that I had in mind is that we have 9 participants. Each of them would need a beacon. So I defined 1 beacon for each person, 1 beacon for myself because I'm not a participant here, and in the study, and 1 beacon for and 1 beacon for the room. And then I basically just clicked add here. And if the beacon was supposed to go to a participant, I said it's participant owned. I select a participant from this list, and then I assign these 3 values. A bit later, I talk about exactly why, what these values are, the team ID, role ID, and subject ID, what they are, and how we can define them. But regardless, when I enter these values, it gives me 4 values here: the UUID, the name, the major, and the minor. This is the way that the iBeacon standard from Apple is set up. For you to program a beacon, you need these 4 values, and that's how, like, Ethica uses a formula to create it, to calculate these 4 values, and then basically I came to. So these 2 beacons are from 2 different companies. One is from a company called Contact.io. The other one is from a company called Gimbal. That for each of them, I had to use their own software to program them. I'll show you tomorrow morning exactly how we can do the programming. But when I set it up in their website, it has an interface here. You can see, for example, this one is a bit more straightforward. It asks you what is the UUID, what is the major, and what is the minor. I just literally copied the values from the site, pasted it here, and then through the app, I applied it to these devices. I'm gonna leave this one here in this room somewhere that it won't be taken, probably here. Okay, that remains there for the next 3 days. And so as we come to the room, our phone picks up the signal from this. Although I'm worried because I've put it in this table, it might impact the signal. So the signal might get a bit weaker, and like, for example, people who are sitting at far end, their phone might not pick up this one. It's better if you put it in the open space, but we also we also might. I'm not sure if they lock the room in the evening. No. We might come back tomorrow and the beacon might not be there, so we probably have to be careful about that.
No, it'll be fine.
So, okay, now I have these. I had to tape them because I had to write down who the beacon is for. This one is, I think it's number. Okay, this is number 1. That's for participant 1336. I don't know if you recognize your ID here, you can please let me know so I can give you your
You should
beacon.
tell them how they find out their participant ID.
To find out the participant ID, you just have to go to the app, and if you go to settings, down below it's written the ID. Actually, 1327 is the one that I created. 13257 is the one here.
Mine is 13 to 31. Which
Uh,
is 6, I guess.
13 to 32,
31.
31. That would be number 6. So I have to see. Okay, this one is for me. 5. Oh, you taped them too good, Nate. So it's just like 5. I think this. Yeah, I should.
Yes,
The,
indeed.
the reason I taped them is that for this to get wiped. But
I
during
know.
the taping, it got wiped.
During the taping, right.
Yeah.
This is 1, 2, 4,
1, 2, 4, 5.
5.
This is probably 8. Yeah, this is 8. This is probably 6.
I believe it's 6.
Yeah.
But,
And then this one and this one are completely wiped. So before I
Yeah.
have to check.
yeah.
So this one is 6. It will be yours. Yeah. Others who joined, if you know your ID, if you let me know.
I think I'm
8? 8 is this one. No, this is 5. 8 was this one. Yes. And you're 7? Okay. 7. 1, 2, 4, 5. Okay, one of them is 9, the other one is 7. This one is 7.
You recognized her handwriting better than
I do, yes. So if anyone else, number 4 and number 2. Okay. So number 4 for you, and number 2 for you. Number 3 is this. Actually, you're right. This one is something, and this one is 5, and this one is 1. 9. I believe this is 3. So the reason the numbering got a bit mixed up is that when you program them, you have to know which configuration you apply to each of them, and they all look alike, of course. That's why I had to write down with a marker, and the marker was these erasable markers. So we had to tape it, but then it got erased during taping. And anyway, so if you keep the beacon with you and then the app running as well, the app doesn't detect the proximity to your own beacon, but detects when it sees other beacon and captures that. So later on, when we go check the data, it says when you come to it shows when you came to the room, it shows when you were in proximity to other people, and we can see how we can plot and create a network graph based on this data. Okay, now for now, let's move to creating surveys. That's the topic of this afternoon. So, as we discussed before the break, if you want to add surveys, you have to come here, and in this page, design surveys, you can manage all the surveys for your study. This gives you the option. This lists all the surveys that you have for your study, and also allows you to delete them, basically manage them, delete them, modify them, move them to another study, or create a duplicate of them and releasing them. I'll talk about what the release now does in a moment. Changes to a given survey doesn't impact the current responses. Yes, and if you modify the survey, it doesn't impact the current responses that you have received. As I said, surveys are version. Like for example, this is version 0 because it hasn't been published yet. When I publish it, it becomes version 1, and every change that I make, it increases the version, and responses are versioned as well. Most of the survey what you can do with the survey editor is just similar to any other survey tool that you use, like Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, RedCap, or those ones. I'm not going to go through the details. I just focus on the parts that I believe it's a bit different between our system and other similar systems. A couple of components that we will discuss. One is triggering logic. That basically says that's the logic that specifies when the survey should be prompted, whenever participants want, whether on a specific times table, or for example, if you want to tie to a beacon session detection, and so on. The other one is notification, how we want to to notify participants when the survey is prompted, and also how we want to remind them if they haven't responded yet. Criteria, which basically specifies under what condition the survey is enabled or disabled for a given participant. You can write criteria and say, well, if this case is met, this survey should be prompted to this individual or not. A very clear example is if you have control and intervention groups, you can ask questions at the beginning of the study. And based on that, you can add criteria to surveys that say this survey should be prompted to control group, this survey should be prompted to intervention groups, and so on. And the expiry time, basically when the survey is prompted, how much time the participant has to complete it. Surveys are text files similar to RedCap that you upload, I believe it's a spreadsheet for the survey. This is in ethical surveys are defined as a format called JSON. It's similar to, if you're familiar with XML, but anyway, it's a structured data similar to this that describes the survey. You can program a new survey completely in Ethica's graphical interface if you want, or you can create it in a text file like this and then upload it to the system. This has advantages if you, for example, want to make certain changes in the file. It's sometimes easier to do a search and replace in file rather than going and doing it one by one. You can also create a survey, download the JSON format, modify it, upload it. It just applies all the changes right away. Okay, I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to go to the edit survey here. It has, of course, a section for triggering logics. We'll talk about it in detail. It has a section for notifications. And here at the bottom, it allows me to download the response. I'm going to publish this. I probably have to add a question to it. So there's already a question. I'm going to publish this because when I, okay. And now I can download the responses. Sorry, not the responses. I can download the survey content as JSON down here. It opens this JSON file. It's the text file, as I said. I can come to a text editor like here. I can open this text editor. I can say go to downloads and open survey.json. Oops, sorry. There are some online tools to allow editing JSON files that simplifies it. One of them is called, for example, JSON Editor Online. If you search, there are quite a few of them. I'm going to just copy this text here. And I'm going to come here. And this is just a website that I use to modify and format the JSON files. I'm going to paste it here. Now I can say format it. You can see that my survey is just presented here as JSON. I can modify it. For example, I can say, this is a modified question. Now I'm going to select this, and I want to upload this instead of my survey. I can just copy this, delete the content here, paste it here. I save it in the same file. Now if I come here to the website, I can say I want to upload from downloads from survey.json. This is the file. Yeah, you can see the text here changed. Like it could be like if you have, for example, especially if you have a very long instrument, a very long survey that you have that has a lot of questions. Sometimes modifying is as a text, it helps, makes doing things faster.
But Mohammed, you'll show them how to like add pages and that sort of thing.
Yes, we will talk about that. But this is just this is the only that's the only part that I was going to talk about, the text version of the survey. For the rest, we'll talk about the user interface of this of the editor of the survey editor. But of course, all of them can be done in text as well. So, as I said, these by default, this is you keep saving your work. It's just in the draft mode. If you want to publish, when you're done, you can publish it, and that will. If you don't have any participants in your study, it's easy. But if you do have participants currently enrolled, it's a bit tricky. You just have to make sure that the new survey is definitely updated on their device.
So Mohammed, sorry, if I could just ask about that. So when you publish it, this is a new version potentially of that survey, like if you change
Correct.
it.
Yes.
And some of those participants may currently be connected and might receive it immediately, and some may be offline and will receive it at later times, like when they when they're reconnected to the network and their phone reaches out to Ethica.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes. So if I try to publish it here, it gives me three options. The first is that yes, I want to send a request to all, send a message to all. The first one is that I want to send a message to all participants right now to their app and update their survey with this change. The second one is that if you want to just send to a subset of people, and third one is that no, don't send it right now. I will. I'll continue editing. Here I say, well, I don't want to send it right now. I will continue editing, and then maybe later on I'll get back to it. So we already have started using this editor. It has three sections. The first one is a survey that basically has configurations on when it has to be prompt, when it has to prompt the survey, what should be the notifications and reminders. The second one is the question flow. Here, basically all the pages, questions within every page, and so on. And the third one is a preview that basically shows a phone and the survey, the questions that you have as they would appear in the phone. This is a bit this is a bit outdated. We have to make some changes to this one. So if you make some changes on the survey, you might come here and they might not show those features. For example, if you some of the new features that we have added to the survey, the preview still doesn't show them properly. That's also something that we are working on, updating this preview. Okay, now going to the triggering logic. As I said, triggering logic basically specifies when you want to prompt a survey. And a survey in Ethica can have one of the following 5 triggering logics. Either it can be used for eligibility. As I showed, if you add eligibility survey, it basically specifies, basically determines whether the participant is eligible for a survey or not. A user triggered, basically participants can initiate it anytime they want. A time-based survey, a survey based on proximity data, or a dropout survey. We'll talk about each of them in the next slides. But doesn't matter, like based on which of these triggering logics the survey is prompted. One thing that we'll talk about is sessions. And when the survey is prompted, it creates this session. And a session represents a given time that the survey was prompted to the participant and was potentially responded. So for example, if your participants are supposed to be in the study for, say for 2 weeks, and every morning you want to prompt them a survey, that's going to be 14 sessions or 15 sessions that they will be prompted. Some of them they will complete it, some of them gets canceled or not responded. But still, each of those individual surveys will be, well, we can't call them surveys, survey sessions will be called the session. And each session will have some attributes that we'll talk about, like for example, the time that was scheduled to be prompted, the time that it was completed, how it was completed, whether it was submitted, means that it was completely responded, expired, means that the time that we allocated for them passed and they didn't respond to it, cancelled, means that they decided not to respond to it, Blocked, I believe it's in the next slide, we can talk about blocked surveys more. Blocked surveys means that only Ethical allows to have one open session for every survey for every participant. You can't have multiple. Like, for example, if you're asking them a question about, for example, how do you feel every morning, you can have only one session pending waiting for their response. If you schedule it to be prompted at once every hour, and also you set the expiry time to be like 12 hours, I get the first one at 9 a.m., I respond to it. I get the next one at 10 a.m., I respond to it. But if I don't, if I get the next one at 11 a.m. and I don't respond to it, the 12, 1 p.m., 3, 2 p.m., and so on, it doesn't pile up. Those ones are all immediately marked as blocked. So basically, sessions can be either upcoming, open, waiting for response, or closed and completed. And at any given time, a survey can have only one open session. If the scheduled time of a session arrives, but there's another open session from the same survey for the same participant, the new session is marked as blocked and closed right away. So if you actually make a mistake in scheduling your surveys too close to each other and they might overlap and the participant doesn't complete one, when you go to this system, you see a lot of them are blocked, means that they couldn't be prompted. Yes?
Is there any way to, so I can see how that could get frustrating for someone if, for instance, the participants for some reason didn't complete or scheduled it too close. But even if you didn't schedule it that close and they're still not completing them, is there an option to potentially, if a survey hasn't been completed in a certain amount of time, that it just fades away or something goes so that it doesn't allow the blockage of other data being collected?
That's basically the expiry time. You can say that I prompt the survey, participants have 2 days to respond. If they did respond within these 2 days, fine. If they did not respond within these 2 days, it's marked as expired, and immediately after that there can be another session.
So the
is that
survey disappears.
It disappears, yes. If for example you set it to here is 240 minutes, that's 6 hours, I guess. 4 hours. Yeah, sorry, I math the other way around. My hour was 40 minutes. So it's 4 hours. If the one of them is prompted at 9 a.m., you probably should set your timetable for the next one to be prompted at the earliest at 1 p.m. If it's earlier than 1 p.m., so if it's, for example, at noon, there is a chance that that one gets blocked if they haven't responded to it. With time-based surveys, it's still straightforward. What's a bit trickier is when it comes to contextual surveys. You say the survey should be prompted when they are in proximity with another beacon or when they enter this geofence. But then how much time you have to give them before the next one is prompted? We'll get to some of those configurations that you can say to just prompt the survey if this session the person hasn't been in contact for this long. You can adjust the timing in a way that the survey is expired before the next one is prompted. Yeah. So for the triggering logic, some of them are quite straightforward. Like, for example, the eligibility. If you create a survey and mark it as eligibility, means that the app should prompt it when the participant tries to join the study. One thing I have to mention is that you can add multiple triggering logics of different types to your survey. For example, you can have a survey that is presented every morning at 9 a.m., but also when they meet a certain beacon type, or also can be user initiated. So anytime user wants, they can tap on it and they can start it. You can add any combination of these ones except the eligibility and dropout. If a survey is eligibility, it's just eligibility. You can't add other types to it because conceptually it doesn't make sense for you to have an eligibility survey that's also presented every day at 9 a.m. You know, so here if I try to add eligibility, it shows me a warning that you cannot do that. I'm going to remove this user trigger and say I want to add an eligibility survey here. The only eligibility triggering logic here, the only thing that it asks me is a criteria for the eligibility of the participants. We'll talk about how the criteria what is the syntax for them. But here I can write, for example, if I had a question that how old are you? I always get nervous when I want to write surveys because there's always the wording has to be different, and it's always very important how to word it. So I hope it's right. But we can say it as a number question, anything between, for example, say from 1 year old to 100. Sorry, the other way around. And display unit would be years, and steps goes up by 1, and default is, there's no default. Now we have this, I can say the question 1 of this survey, when I set it to eligibility, I can say Q3969 1 should be bigger than 18. I'll talk about how that syntax is formed later, but anyway, so this can be an eligibility survey for our study. Let's say survey to ensure participants are between 18 and 40 years of age. So I'm going to close this, publish it as well. Yes.
You mentioned there's a way to trigger the survey every time, and it depends on whatever you define. So let's say I wanted to trigger a survey every hour.
Yes.
Like, is there that option?
Yes. The next one, it's in a minute. I'll get to that. As I said, so the quick answer, short answer is that you have to create time schedule, but the time doesn't allow you to repeat per hour. The minimum interval it has is day, but you can add multiple time schedules. So you can say you can add 10 of them, 1 for every 9, 1 for every, well, 24 of them if you literally want every hour of the day. But you probably don't want overnight because that would be a bit hard. Yeah, but I'll show that in a minute. Yeah. So if I come back here, we have this survey. It's version 3 already because I have published it 3 times. And it says that it's, it has a triggering logic of its eligibility trigger. So for eligibility criteria validation. And it doesn't have any notifications because when the participant is prompted with the survey, they're already interacting with the app. So you don't have to use any notifications for this survey. I believe even if you add notifications, it will be discarded. I think if it's user triggered, dropout, or eligibility triggering logic, even if you add notifications, it will not be used because the participant is actually using the app when one of these surveys is prompted.
So Mohammed, they would receive this notification survey when they either through a link or through a URL or through a QR code.
Oh no! This is for yeah. Maybe I should have been more
for
clear.
eligibility.
Yes, they receive the request to join the study, and when they start joining the study, like they will be prompted with this. We'll go back to the app, we'll refresh it, and you can they can see that how the survey is prompted.
Okay. And the other point that you mentioned kind of in passing, but which is very important, is the surveys, when you modify them, it's a new version that's created of that survey. And when somebody responds to a given instance of the survey, a given instrument is shown to them, they fill it out and submit it, for example, the version number associated with that survey is retained, right?
Yes.
So we know not only to what survey was that being responded, to what survey were they responding, but the particular version. So if there were a change at some point in the wording or a change in adding an extra question, we know from their response which version of it they were responding to.
Yes, and most of the so the versions might go high, up more than you expect. Like if you, for example, even change the name or description of a survey that doesn't impact participants, still the version number increases. It's something that you probably have to manage it manually to know from which version the changes that applied had would have impacted participants' responses. So I can add another survey here. This one I can I can set it to be user triggered. For example, daily survey. I can add it to be user triggered, and here, when you create a user triggered survey, you basically say that this survey should be prompted to participants should always be able to start this survey anytime they want through tapping on a button, and you just specify the caption of the button here. For example, here you can see the interface on the left that there were two surveys here, each with this very elaborately described caption. It takes probably a while to to read it, yeah, you can tapping on each of them starts the survey that was associated to this. Here I can assign a name to this. I can say daily survey. Of course, I don't have, like, I haven't prepared a proper survey for this, so this is this doesn't really it's not really useful for any sort of type of study. But the purpose here is just to show the features that we can use. The other one is the time triggering logic, which, as we talked, like, it basically specifies the survey has to be prompted at a certain time. And as I said, you can have a survey that has any combination of this triggering logics. Here I can also add a time triggering logic to this survey. And then when I do this, for example, assume that, okay, I'm happy with this setting, I go with this, then the survey is prompted as described here between 9 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. relative to the midnight of the study registration date using uniform distribution, or the participant can start at any time by tapping on the daily survey button. So either of these two will start this survey.
Yeah, sorry. So, for example, I joined in the study around 8 a.m. in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So it will find the relative time like 9 hours after my...
No, well, I didn't go through the details of this dialogue. I'll explain that. But the very first item that you pick is the base time, whether the base time should be a study registration date or a study registration time. If it's date, then it's the midnight of the date that they join. If it's time, it's exactly the same time that they join. So you can say, prompt this survey 3 hours after they joined, or you can say, prompt this survey at 9 a.m. of which day. You see, it says between day 1 and 9 a.m. and day 1, 11 a.m. Actually starts from day 0, but day 0 is always not a complete date. So because they don't join exactly at midnight of that date, right? So if they join at 9 a.m., there's 9 hours missing from your day 0. If they join at 10 p.m., 22 hours missing from your day 0. And if you schedule it in a way that it falls in that missing hour, they don't get prompted. Well, actually, they get prompted if the survey hasn't expired yet when they join. If the survey has expired, then it just gets marked as expired.
So with this setup, what will happen if I join today at 3 p.m.? I will get my survey tomorrow at 9 a.m. in the morning?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and there is a section here down that you can specify that if I join on, okay, sorry, I probably have to close this one. Oh, well, I'll get back to this, but if you can specify that if you join at a certain time, when would be the prompt that they get. I'm going to talk about the repeat section as well very quick, and then we can try it out. You can also specify whether the survey should be prompted only once, or it has to be repeated multiple times based on this. For example, you can say repeated on every day or every week. For example, you can say repeated every week on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and repeat after 15 occurrences. And here you can see that I can say if I join on For example, today, or for example, on Tuesday at, say, 10 a.m., it says the next one's going to be Wednesday 26th at 9 p.m., then it's 9:46, it's 28th, 1st, 3rd, 5th, and so on. And goes to 15. If I limit it for instead of 15, I say, yeah, I can say, if I say 4, you can see it will generate only these 4 examples. Okay. Before I, yes, yeah.
Could you use logic that's like random, like getting the survey triggered on random days during a week or something like that? So it's not pre-specified.
We are actually working on this logic. The first one that right now we are working on is exactly random days of a given month falling on weekdays and weekends. But this is also something that we have to expand to. Yeah, if you want to specify, yeah, because this will be, this will generate this pick a random time between these start and end time. Which, by the way, if you want it to be at a certain time, you just have to set the start and end time to be exactly the same time, and then it will be that time. You can say from 9:30 to 9:30. It will be 9:30. But the what I want to say is that, but to say that pick a random date within this range, and then it needs a second level of randomization to pick first a random date, and then a random range from that to pick a random time. Yeah, we are working on the second level of the randomization. Okay, and before I go to the proximity triggering logic, that's a bit longer. You also can specify criteria for your triggering logics. Basically, you can say one very common use case is that you can say if people prefer morning surveys, morning times, use this triggering logic for them. If people prefer afternoon, use this one. If people prefer, for example, late in the evening, use this one. And then based on this criteria, you can add, for example, 3 of these sets, and for each of them add a criteria similar to what we added for, I think I still have it in here, something like this. You can say if their response is equal to this value, use this criteria, otherwise don't use this criteria, use the other one. The criteria can be used on any of these triggering logics to enable or disable it. Of course, except the dropout and eligibility, all of the other surveys, all of the other triggering logics can have a criteria. So with this, you basically can have any set of triggering logics that can have any criteria that enables or disables them based on their role in the study, and the system prompts a survey based on that. I believe I covered all of the items that was here, yeah, for the repeat, and I'll talk about notifications a bit later.
Mohammed,
Yes.
there was one thing, and you told me about this, that they might find useful. A response in one survey can then be used in another survey?
I'll talk about the criteria, yes. I probably implicitly talked about that. If, for example, you have a base, thanks for mentioning that, Alan. If you have a survey that is used as baseline, or as any other survey, you can use the responses for any survey coming after that for skip patterns and branching, or enabling or disabling other surveys. We'll get to that when we talk about criteria, that how you can point to a question not only within that survey, but any survey that a participant has responded up to the point of the criteria evaluation. So before we get that, I think the last item here is the proximity triggering logic. This basically uses the data from Bluetooth beacons to detect a proximity session between the participant and any other physical object that carries a beacon. And based on that, prompts the survey. There are a couple of settings that you can have. You can either, for example, in one setting, like one of the examples that Nate mentioned a couple of times, if you want to measure the proximity of the participant to a service dog or their bike or any other object, the participant doesn't have to carry the beacon, but it's the other object that has to carry the beacon, or the beacon has to be attached to. Because you want the phone to detect that object. But in this case, that's one scenario. The other scenario is that if you want participants to be also, if you want to detect the proximity of participants between themselves. In this case, you probably have to give a beacon to every participant as well. Basically, if you want the presence of an object to be detected, you need to give them a beacon. The reason that I gave each of you a beacon right now is that so other people's smartphones can detect your presence here. If you keep carrying the phone but don't carry the beacon, your phone keeps tracking people in your surrounding, but other people don't see you here. So because your beacon is not here, so other people don't see your presence here. So I believe probably it's better to also talk a bit about this. For setting up a proximity beacon, the setting that Ethica uses is that it assumes that you divide your study subjects into three groups, not three groups, you assign them three attributes. You can assign them to different teams. You might only have one team. For example, here we are just one class. But a good example of it that we had another study in Netherlands, that they were recruiting family members. So parents and their children, and every family was a team, because every family had the father and the mother and the children, and they are completely independent of each other. Like you're not interested in the contact of for example, members of one family with with other family. You are interested in the contacts within that family members. So in that case, every family becomes one team. Or for example, if there is a class, there are multiple classes that you want to interact, you want to measure participants' interactions within each class becomes a team. But here we only have one class, so it becomes one team. So that will be team one. Now within each team, you have multiple roles. Depends on the case that again you are designing. Here we could go with just one role. We say everyone is a member in this class, is participating in this class. Or we could say we have TAs, we have instructors, we have students, and we have classroom or any other role that you want to define. Again, you can have either one role or you can have multiple roles. And the last one is the subject ID. Yeah, so as I said, the study subjects should be divided into one or more teams. One or more roles should be defined for the subjects. And roles are applied to all the teams. So it's not that on one team you have, for example, father and mother and children, and in the other team you have a student and something else, or the instructor and so on. So you define teams, you define roles, and each subject should be assigned to a given team and should have a certain role. And that's exactly what I did here. I believe it was in this page. I assume we only have one team, so all of them are called team one. But I created three roles. Role one, which is for attendees. Role two, which is for the room, and role three for the instructor. But that's completely arbitrary, of course. In this case, for your case, you need to, based on the setting of your study, you have to adjust it. And when you define this team role subject, you can then you can identify every beacon individually and separate from other beacons in the study. Now, if I go to this one, okay, I will go to the surveys and start adding a proximity triggering logic. If I press edit, and then we can go through the sections that it has. Now from the top, I basically specify what scenarios should be met for this survey to be presented. I say, well, the team of the visiting beacon, whether it can be any team, or it can be a team of a specific ID, or it can be the same team. For example, in the case when you are studying like the interactions between family members, you want them to have the same team ID. But doesn't matter what's the, so it only works if my team ID is the same as your team ID. Otherwise it won't prompt anything. In this case, we have a team ID for this room. If you want to have a survey that's prompted when we come to this room, we say the team ID should be, sorry, the team ID is the same actually, that would go to role. Yeah, I got confused for a second. The second one is role. You specify that the session that is detected, what is the role of the both subjects in that? The person that is seeing the beacon and the beacon itself. Here we can see, you can say it can be any role, or it can be roles with the following. For example, from role 1 to role 2, 3. I just want to make sure that you still follow this. So here the assumption is that because in any sort of contact detection, it's one, what they call it, node, or one phone. For example, here our smartphone detects the beacon. And now this creates a session. It says, well, my smartphone detected this beacon, for example, from, say, for example, from 1 p.m. to 1:30. Now, there are some attributes, the team role and subject ID for this one, and there's a team role subject ID for this one. Now, we basically have to specify the pattern that should cause this survey to be prompted. For example, here, if I want to say prompt the survey when participants come to this room, I say the team doesn't matter because all of them are in the same team, but I can say the phone that visits the beacon should have the role ID of 1. And probably would have been more helpful if I just would open this page here as well. Yeah, so have role ID of 1, and it visits role ID of 2.
So, Mohammed,
Yes.
to be clear here, that from 2, so from 1 to 2, if you had switched it from 2 to 1,
It means that if the place sees your beacon, but the place doesn't have a phone,
Exactly.
so it doesn't see your
Yeah, so
beacon.
it's not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same. Yeah, so it's different if you say, what you want to say is that the phone will see the beacon, not the beacon sees the phone, because that doesn't happen.
Yeah, so what's a bit confusing, it says between the following nodes, which sounds like it would be symmetric.
Yes, it's asymmetric. Yeah.
But it's, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point
So-and-so
too.
detects so-and-so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To-
The phone detects the place.
So I say 2. So I assume that we want to prompt this survey when people come to this to this room every morning. So I say the team ID doesn't matter, or I can say the team ID does matter. For example, they should be part of the same team. Still is okay because we are in the same team. Works exactly the same. Or I can say it should be part of the team 1. Here in our case, because we only have one team, it would be equivalent, but for our case, we can say it doesn't matter from which team, as long as a beacon of with role ID 1 visits a beacon with role ID 2, which is the beacon that we just placed in this room. And, sorry, here. And when should this trigger happen? When such a session is detected, you can say, trigger the survey after visiting the subject for X minutes continuously, or trigger the survey X minutes after departing from this subject when they have been in contact for X minutes. Here we want to say when you come to this room, maybe after half an hour. So I can say, trigger this survey when after visiting the subject for 30 minutes, I'll explain tomorrow what this means when we talk about processing beacon data and how the data is collected and what it means when we say after 10 minutes we consider the beacon as departed. But for now, this is just a statement here. Each prompt should be so many minutes apart. What this means is that you can, so if we come here at in the morning and after, for example, 30 minutes, we receive a survey. But if we sit here, we are still in the session, and after 2 hours, we don't want to get another, like every 30 minutes to get a prompt. Here you can say how many, or no, sorry, the better example is that if you leave for lunch and you come back, you don't want to get another morning welcome because that's still the same thing, right? Although you left and you came back to the room, but you don't want this to receive a prompt. So you can say that if you prompt a survey, don't prompt for another 5 hours or 6 hours. So basically, this instructs the FPL not to prompt the survey if there's already been a survey prompted of the same kind for the past 6 hours. The main reason for this is that there is a lot of disconnection when you are detecting there's a lot of noise in the sensor, in the beacon data that we capture. And a lot of times this disconnection can be picked up by the app as departing and coming back, while actually it's not departing and coming back, it's the same session. You are sitting here and there are like 20 other beacons around, and you sometimes detect the beacon here in the room, sometimes don't, and you don't want this for constantly prompting the participants. You say that if you prompt once, for the next 5 to 6 hours, don't prompt. Wait for after that and then prompt again. And you can also filter by RSSI. RSSI is, and we'll talk about it tomorrow when we talk about the data, is basically, to put it very simply, is the same bars that you see when you connect to Wi-Fi or you pair with a Bluetooth device. Basically shows how strong the signal is. And this can be used as a proxy to the distance. Because the further you are from your, for example, Wi-Fi router, the lower the bars are and the weaker the signal is. The same concept applies here as well. The further you are from the beacon, the weaker the signal is. And that's this RSSI value is lower. And by the way, RSSI value is actually reverse. It's so the 0 is the strong, or -1 is the strongest one, and as it goes down, it gets weaker. Anything between like lower than I believe -100 is too weak to be picked up. So here you can say, for example, if you say RSI value should be -30, means that it should be very strong, or they should be very close to the beacon. Or you can simply say don't filter this. Okay, I'm gonna add this as well. Try to zoom out. And the dropout triggering logic is a survey that is prompted when the participant tries to drop out of the study. If I come here, I explained it very quickly in the previous session, but participants, as I said in the previous session, participants can also choose to drop out of the study in the app. To do that, they can come here and they can go to About Study, press Study Settings, and here they can choose, I want to drop out of the study. I can say, yes, I want to do that.
And is that true for all studies?
For all studies,
Okay.
yes. And well, because I didn't have a dropout survey, it just dropped me out of the study. But if I had, it would first present me with that survey, and then it would leave it.
I didn't select this option at the beginning of creating the study.
It's not by option, it's for all studies. The dropout?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's available in all studies.
I thought it used to be only those who enabled it for.
Yeah.
Yes, the reason that we changed it is that turned out that sometimes people accidentally register in a wrong study, and then they can't go out. Like they're locked in. They have to continue with all of it all the way to the end.
Right.
So, and it made more sense to make and participants can drop out anytime they want by uninstalling the app. So
Sure.
we might as well just present the option to them.
Yeah.
So it didn't make sense to keep it as an option.
And when they drop it, they can get this special survey, whereas
Yes.
if they uninstall the app,
Yeah.
they're just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Before it used to be an option that you could configure it for your study, whether you want to allow participants to uninstall, to drop out of the study, but it didn't make much sense to have it as an option. It has to be something that is always available to participants to leave the study. Yeah, and a few examples of these combinations of triggering logics that I talked about. For example, you can have a user triggered or time triggered combined, or you can have multiple time triggered, then it will be a union of all the times that they specify, or you can have a one proximity and one time triggered logic. But eligibility and dropout is special. You can't have multiple of them. Yes.
I don't, you may get to this in other days, but when we're talking about, you know, when you might use a beacon versus when it's best to use GPS
Mhm.
tracking, so if we wanted to trigger surveys using GPS, is that something that we would use this logic function for, or is it something different that we would configure?
For GPS, we haven't added the functionality yet to allow participants to allow researchers to use a graphical interface to create it. So for now, what we are doing is that we still have to do it ourselves manually. It's not part of the user interface, but we are working to create a triggering logic based on a GPS as well. And the way that it works is it allows you to create geofences. Basically define regions on the map and say when they then it will be a similar logic. You can say when they entered this geofence or when they left this geofence from the survey, and how long they have to be in the geofence or how long it should pass from their departure of that geofence from that geofence then to prompt the survey. Very similar setting, but instead of proximity sessions between a beacon and a phone, it will be based on a person going into that geofence that you have specified. Now, this geofence can be a gas station, can be a park, can be anything else.
Could be a healthcare facility,
Yes.
could be a vape shop.
Now, for notifications, you can specify, you can add as many notifications as required for your study. You can basically say, when the survey is prompted, send a notification with title of new survey, and you have a survey awaiting your response. And you can also specify how long after the survey is prompted this should be this notification should be sent. Here I can say show this after 0 minutes after. Here I have set the survey not to expire, and then so basically I can add as many notifications that I want, but assume that I want to say expire after 4 hours. So I can say notify after 0 minutes with this message, and then notify after 30 minutes with saying new survey is still waiting. Okay. And I can add another one. Can say new survey all time zones running out. I can add, for example, to after 200 minutes. So if they respond right away, they don't see these two notifications. If they respond after 30 minutes, they don't see the second one, and so on. Sorry, well, let me.
Sorry, so those are all in-app notifications, but you could make it
this will be different.
notifications in other mechanisms as well.
These are all in-app notifications. The you can send notifications as text messages and SMS and email as well. You can say first send it in email, then send a text message, and then send the in-app notification or any other combination. But we haven't rolled them out yet because we're waiting for the web-based interface to be completed, and then we can add those. One thing that's important to keep in mind is that the sending email and text message is managed by the backend. So if it's a proximity triggering logic, there are some limitations there. If it's proximity triggering logic, you can't send text messages because the system doesn't work this way to say detect the proximity and then if they are in the proximity of that, send them a text message because the proximity works offline and we can't be sure that the person is online when the proximity is detected and survey is supposed to be prompted.
So,
Yes.
because you're using some technical terms, maybe I can help unpack
Yes,
that.
sorry.
So the deal is, if I could try to express it, the phone is the logic of the phone. The app on the phone is what detects proximity right now. So if I detect proximity to a beacon, for example, it might prompt me with a survey. And the way in which it figures that out, all of that lives only in the phone. So it doesn't require that I'm connected with a network of any sort. I could be canoeing on the Churchill River. I could be, up on a northern reserve. I could be, it could be offline, as someone who's been given a phone but has very little access to online content. And all that lives on the phone, and it doesn't require the Ethica server where it stores the data to be involved. And what Mohammed is saying is to have an SMS message sent to the phone requires sort of the server to know about my proximity. So that's not supported right now. Whereas in-app notifications are supported, it's not to be able to escalate to sending me an SMS to say, hey, fill out that survey.
Yes.
But meanwhile, something like a time-triggered survey, if I haven't filled that out, it could escalate to SMS. So
Yes, because the time trigger, the app knows, the server knows ahead of time when is the expected schedule that survey should be prompted. For example, you say once a day at 9 a.m. So the app knows if you join on June 1st, it's going to be June 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and so on. So it knows at 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. you're supposed to respond to the survey. So the app can send text messages or emails for those surveys. But if it's proximity, it relies on the data on the phone to detect the proximity and says that, oh yeah, now this proximity data matches this data that the description that they've asked for example, the roles, the teams, the session IDs and everything matches, so I have to prompt it. But that's what the app does. The server doesn't know it. And even while we do upload the data shortly after it's collected, but it's not real time. It's not that as soon as we collect the data, we upload it. That would require continuous internet connection and also would probably drain their battery a lot more. So the app works offline, and the app makes all these decisions independently. That's why if you are using any of these triggering logics, to proximity or time, of course, for eligibility user and dropout, we are not using notifications because the participant is interacting with the system. But if you are using time or proximity, for time the server knows ahead of time, so can send emails and SMS and so on. But for proximity, the server doesn't know ahead of time. Similarly, for other context detection, that happens on the app independently makes these decisions. So the server is not involved, so the server cannot send these notifications.
thank you.
There is one thing you can do as well is that you can use only a subset of notifications with every triggering logic. If you want, for example, you can say only use these notifications. If, for example, the survey is prompted in this way, only use these 5 triggering notifications, otherwise use the other subset and so on. This is, I don't believe if it's widely used, but it's a feature, it's a functionality that's there. Okay. Now we can go to the criteria.
And so, Mohammed, just as a higher picture, a higher level thing, with the notifications, you can have for most of the types of notifications, you can have an escalating series of notifications. So it might remind you more quickly via an in-app notification, and then escalate to an SMS message, and then maybe to an email, something like that.
Yeah, but that's possible, but you just have to make sure you don't want to send notifications if you are, well, you just don't want to send too many notifications if,
Agreed.
yeah.
Agreed. But there's multiple ways to nudge someone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, correct. Yes.
With the SMS and email notifications, will it be possible to notify the researcher of certain types of responses from participants? Like if I wanted to get a notification if my participant told me that they were about to do something that I really don't want them to do?
Yes, this is something we are working on right now. These are we're actually working with a team in McGill that's exactly the functionality that they intend to use. The way that we right now implement it is that we use this and tie to the logic that they want, and then they receive the prompt. But it doesn't. We still don't have this as part of the user interface for the researchers to go and select and set this up. The challenge is that when we want to set up a system like this, we have to make sure that we understand all the cases. So what we design covers not 100%, but 90% of the cases. And we are not still yet that confident. We haven't seen enough cases to be able to implement this. That's why we usually treat them case by case. So first we understand exactly what are the usual scenarios that we have to address, and then we use that. So the solution that we use right now is that we put a logic in the backend and say, well, so when I say backend on our servers, that say monitor the incoming data. If certain pattern is detected, send this message to either the researchers or someone else who's, for example, is involved in the study.
So maybe that would be something you could talk to Mohammed about, what your need would be so that he could understand how it relates to what they've captured now.
Correct, yes. Yeah, so we talked a lot about the criteria. I'm gonna keep it at this level. I mentioned, for example, your triggering logics can have a criteria to define whether they should be enabled or not. Eligibility trigger surveys can have a criteria to define whether a participant is eligible or not. And criteria are used elsewhere as well, but what they are is basically what in other surveys, the survey systems are referred to as formula or conditional expressions in programming languages. If you are comfortable with programming languages, it's referred to as conditional expression, which is basically an expression that evaluates to two values, either true or false. True means go with this action, false means don't. And ethical evaluates the criteria right before it's supposed to do something, not ahead of time. And that's why that's a very important distinction, because you can have a criteria that constantly changes based on the previous response. It can change every day. For example, you can say, if so schedule this survey every evening at 9 p.m. only if the morning before they responded in a certain way. So every evening at 9 p.m. the app checks what they respond at 9 a.m. or the day before or the same day, and based on that decides whether to go to do that action or not, or to show that survey or not. And the criteria can apply to a survey to determine whether the whole survey can be enabled or not, or completely should be disabled. Can be applied to a triggering logic to determine whether that particular triggering logic should be enabled or not. Are used in eligibility triggering logic to determine whether the participant is eligible to join or not, and to survey pages for skip pattern and branching. You can basically say only show this page if this criteria is met. Otherwise, don't show this page. Go to the next page or go to some other pages instead. You already saw a text that I wrote like this that I use as formula. It's fairly straightforward. It's the criteria looks like this, which is basically one or more expressions, and each expression looks like this. Basically, it starts with a Q, then is the survey ID, then is the question ID, and then with the value that you expect it to be. It's important to keep in mind that the survey ID can be any survey ID in your study, not only, yes?
So it's probably worth emphasizing that every survey in Ethica is associated with a number.
Yes.
And you can see that number through the interface, I believe.
Well, I usually look at this URL.
Yeah.
But if you go here, they are shown here as well that the survey ID is 3969 or 3973 and so on.
So that's the number of the survey, and that survey might contain many questions, and that Q, first number, underbar, second number refers to the survey number as seen just there, and then the question number within that survey.
Yes.
Is that protected so that if you accidentally put in somebody else's survey that
It doesn't work.
It just won't work?
Yeah, it evaluates to false. Yeah, so if you don't put a survey, if you don't put a criteria, if your criteria is empty, it's true because it means there's no criteria. It just always should happen. But if you put a criteria and it cannot be evaluated for any reason, it evaluates to false and reports an error message in your logs that says you made it. Well, it writes down that the criteria was false. You have to modify it.
And, sorry, Cheryl, did that get your question?
It did, thank you.
You sure? Okay. So there's two other things that Cheryl's question reminded me of. One is for some of these criteria, like enabling a page within a survey, that survey, you can omit the survey number. Is that right? And just say Q31 or
yeah, but you can. I didn't mention it because it could have caused a bit more confusion,
okay.
But it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
To make it a bit shorter.
But okay, and the other question is with respect to that survey number there. That's something which will, even though successive versions of the survey are different,
will remain unchanged.
That remains unchanged.
Yes.
So you might have several different versions of the survey as to what question 31 was, but this is referring to whatever version of the survey it was, we're going to use 31, question 31.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's always.
And to be clear, this could be used as well, not just to enable pages within a survey, but as you said, enable whole surveys. So if you had certain surveys which were to only be asked for smokers, people who reported being a smoker for this study, this could be used to basically to throttle whether or not that person receives a survey of this sort, right?
Yes, correct.
So only if on their baseline survey they said they were a smoker, would they receive this survey once a day asking them about their tobacco habits.
Correct, yes. So basically, you can have a baseline survey. A baseline survey would be a survey that a time-triggered survey that triggers at time 0 relative to the registration date. So as soon as they register, the survey is prompted. It asks them certain questions, and then based on the response that they provide, whether they're male, female, how old they are, or like any other attribute that you have in mind, you can define criteria in all the other surveys of your study that enables or disables them, and prompts the survey based on that. So, any questions so far? Okay. So, as I said, a criteria has one or more expressions, such as, for example, Q58_31 = 0. The reason it uses two equal signs is that one equal sign usually means assignment, means that put 0 in this rather than that. But it's a practice used in programming. But it should be two equal signs, then 0, which are grouped together with parentheses and linked with logical connectives. For example, you can say this or this and this expression. And each expression itself, if you break it down, it has a left and right operand. For example, here is Q5831 is the left operand, and 0 is the right operand. And also, these operands are linked with via an operator. For example, you can say Q5831 should be equal to 0. And the following logical connectives are supported. You can use and, or, not. And for operators, you can use greater than, equal to, less than equal to, equals, and not equal.
So that exclamation point means not equal still.
Yeah. And depending on your survey question, because let me see if I believe it's this slide. Yeah. So the left operand should always point to a question, like for example Q5831. The right operand can be either a question or be a number like 0. And the way that ethical works is that if the operand points to a question, it should be written as, of course, this one. If the operand points to a question, ethical finds the last response the participant has provided to that question, and replaces the operand with the numeric value of that response. It's important because the question that you put there can be a text question. For example, can be, what's your name? And then you can use that question for criteria evaluation. Ethical has to be able to convert this value to a number so it can do the comparison. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to do the comparison. There is a reference in the website. I believe it's under documentation. If you go to documentation under surveys, under criteria, that explains that for all different question types, single, multiple choice, text, audio, video, and so on, all the way to information questions, what combinations are valid, what combinations are not valid. But basically, if the question should be able to convert it to a number. If it's a multiple choice, a radio button or checkbox, the ID of the answer will be the numeric value. If it's a number question, it's very simple, it's just a number value. If it's, for example, a length question, that value will be the response. But if it's something like if it's something like a text response or for example, image question, they cannot be converted to a number.
So for if I want to refer a survey ID from some other study, I can do that?
No. So this all works within your study. Yeah, so that it has to be within that study. If you want to point to another, if you try to point to the idea of another study, it just returns nothing.
Yeah, to be clear, you could refer to another survey in this study, but not to another survey in another study. Yeah.
Yes. Now we talked about this survey as being one activity in the feature items that you can add to Ethica. Others would be cognitive tasks or the time use responses or ASA24 or other nutrition tracking systems. The same concept of triggering logic, criteria for enabling or disabling that activity, and everything else applies to that as well. You can say, for example, one study that we are rolling out soon is asks participants to enter their time use data twice a month, once on weekdays, once on weekends. So the triggering logic there would be repeating on a monthly basis, but the same thing that we talked about, it has to randomly detect a day within within the weekdays of a month, and then a day within the weekends of a month, and that will be the triggering logic. Each of those days will be a session, and the criteria specifies whether for that particular participant these should be prompted, so they should be able to enter their time use data or not. So this is for survey, but the same concept of criteria, triggering logic, and session applies to other activities as well. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the question types. I just show that these are all the question types that are available. This is how they look in the app. For example, an information question that just shows some information to participants.
Maybe I could just say the information question would be a potential particular interest for interventions or something, where you're trying to give someone some information,
some messages,
possibly with multimedia as part of it.
Yeah, I'll get to multimedia later on. Yes.
Yeah, like that picture.
Yeah, that's
which
actually
is a good picture, by the way.
Yes. It's a nice picture, yes. And the story goes back. Now it might be, yeah. I before had another. This is a video that placed here, and this is a thumbnail for that video. And the previous picture, the thumbnail the person in the thumbnail looked really angry, and and I was warned that I really have to change that. So this person looks more friendly. So yeah, the barcode, checkboxes, image, audio question. I believe this one is video question, visual analog scale, and the last one, I believe, yeah, this one. This is an outdated picture, but basically what this provides is that it provides the space that you have for your survey page, for this page, and allows you to put a cognitive task here. Whether this one is an example of a go, no-go reaction time task, but there can be any other task, like time preference task for that's used in economics, or any other task. You create a cognitive task, you add it, you add as one page of your survey, so participants can respond to the questions, then do the task, and then complete the rest.
And maybe it's worth saying, just Mohammed, when you had said the picture or the video or the audio questions, that's to elicit from the person a picture, audio, or video. It's not to be confused with the question content may include a video that they can play, for example, or a picture that they can see. For example, Rifat's a delightful example for her Bengali survey, which is a separate matter, and that sort of content can be used with other question types, you know, so that they can see a picture when answering it. But the question types, like for video, is more for them to submit a video or record a video.
Yeah, I noticed that I'm just going through the slides. It's probably easier to just show it. I assume that you want to add an image question here that basically asks participants to watch the video and respond to, and capture an image most relevant to that video. Here, I really try not to go to YouTube, but I'm afraid I have to do it. Please watch the, you can write, please watch the following video and capture an image most relevant to, you think is most relevant to it. Capture an image you think is most relevant. And here I can put if I click on this one, it allows me to select to put a YouTube URL. The way that Ethica supports video is through YouTube URL, though it doesn't show anything, like it doesn't show YouTube elements around it. You can see here that this is a YouTube video that's hosted in YouTube, that's saved in YouTube and played from there, but all the play, pause, and all the buttons are re-implemented to just make sure it doesn't show YouTube signs there to distract the participants. Yeah.
So just to be clear though, when you say Ethica, the way Ethica supports videos via YouTube, that's to show a video.
Yes.
They can record a video on their phone and submit that to Ethica of their own without it being any.
Yeah, that's a very good distinction. If you record a video, that's saved separately, but for including a video as part of the content, that has to be from YouTube. For example, if I go to YouTube, okay, this is good. Well, yeah, I like his shows. Okay, so I put this link here. And if I let me see if I can make this a user triggered survey here, and then I can go to the app. Okay. I can save this, publish it. I believe I dropped out of the study, but otherwise I could come here, I could join study 780 again. Now, because I added an eligibility survey, it just now prompts me for the response. And if I say, for example, I'm 50 years old, I believe the criteria we put there was between 18 to 40. If I put 50, it says, sorry, you're not eligible. I can say, again, 780. I'm not sure if I put the criteria properly or not. Yes. So I entered this time 19, and now brought me to the this page. I'm just gonna show this one. Settings. Okay, why this is not shown? Did I put a criteria here for this? Okay. And reset. Published. Okay. So this is a user triggered survey update studies. Yes. Okay. Now it has a button here that I can tap. Yeah. So it asks me to capture a video. It doesn't show the video. Again, it's because of simulator. If you have your phone and can try it on your phone, you should be able to play the video on your phone and see how it looks. You just have to, what you have to do is you have to go to, or actually I can do this here. I can come here to participation, adherence, and from here I can say update all participants' devices. Okay, I don't know what happened. Oops. Update device. Yes. Well, there is. Okay. Now, yeah, if you open that, you should be able to see the video on the as part of the survey. We were here. Okay, you had a question? Yes.
Yes. So earlier, I don't know if we didn't go over this, but we talked about participants preferring to take their surveys at different times.
Yes.
Is that something that we have to include in a survey on the research side that we can then reference later, or is that something that I should be able to, as a participant, go and specify in my profile?
It's not in profile. It can. You have two options. You can either ask ahead of, like, as a baseline, when they join in a survey, that what time you prefer to respond to your survey. They can choose, and you can give them options. You can say, they can say morning, afternoon, evening, and based on that, you can define criteria. You can define triggering logics here and say, if they respond morning, show this. If they respond afternoon, if they respond evening, use this. This way, when they join, they select an option, and that option will be used for the rest of the study. Alternatively, you can create a user-triggered survey that says, choose, for example, the caption of that can be choose time of survey, or any other caption that you choose. And then it asks a question that, when do you want to receive your survey? Morning, afternoon, evening. The first time that they choose, you can have a default. You can say by default, or for example, if nothing responded, use morning. But if they go there and they press afternoon, from that point on, they receive the surveys in the afternoon. Then, for example, after 3 days, they can press it again and say, no, I want to get in the morning. It will change again. So this way, you basically specify, you give them the option to change their response, to send a new response anytime, and modify all the surveys that they get. So I couldn't play this video on the simulator. I probably should use my phone later. But if you refresh it, probably you can see the video on your end.
Yes.
Did it work?
Yeah.
Good. So one thing that's important about, let me see if we are, yeah, multimedia content. When you add a video as part of the metadata of the response object, you will also get the interactions that the participant had with that video. Well, something like this person looks a bit nervous, but it's not as bad as the first choice.
No.
Yeah. So Epica captures the interactions with the video. For example, how many times the participant watched that video, what sections of the video they watched, and for like how they jumped back and forth if they did. Did they watch it from the beginning to the end in one sitting, or they went to the end, watched that, came back to the beginning, and so on. You get all these sessions and all this data on the habit of watching the video, on the way that they watch the video. Yeah. So the other thing that you can use in Ethica is using the dynamic question contents. Basically, you can put a very similar format that you would point to a question to create a criteria. You would say question 53_6 to point to a response to a question. You can use the same method to create a dynamic question content. For example, here the question is written as, which of the following steps are you going to take towards your social goal of? And then it's written with double curly braces Q2192_6. Means that go get the last response to this question. Whatever they said, place this as the text of the question. That's why when it's shown on the app, it will read as, which of the following steps are you going to take towards your social goal of make a new friend by going to events you are interested in? You just have to make sure that the options that you choose for this question is forms a complete sentence here, because of course this app doesn't support setting the past tense and present tense and all of those things. So it just gets the last response to this and places it here. I'll wait a bit here. I believe, yeah, we should discuss the survey flow, and that's the items that we wanted to talk about the surveys.
And for those who want to dive into some of this content more, again, these slides either are now or should be soon.
Will be on, yeah.
on that folder for slides underneath the participant resources.
Yes. The last part that I want to talk about surveys is that the flow of the survey and the skip patterns and branching. I think you already should be fairly familiar with that how the branching works. You can assign criteria to each page. You can also modify the orders. But the first item about the survey flow is that the page order. Ethica basically by default shows survey pages per their order in question flow. As you put the pages here, that's the order that Ethica shows them. The first page, second page, third, and so on. But you can also modify the flow given a multiple choice or single choice question, basically a checkbox or a radio button question. You can change this flow. For example, you have page 1 asking, at present, do you smoke cigarettes? Yes, no. In your second page, you can say, on the days that you smoke, how many cigarettes do you usually smoke? And on page 3, you can say, in the past 30 days, did you use chewing tobacco? And you want that, by default, the app goes through page 1, page 2, and then page 3. But you want to say that if they said no, go to page 3, skip page 2. Let's, we can quickly do this here. Can I select something here? No. Okay, so I'm gonna delete these questions. And I can say I want to put a single choice radio button question
so
here.
For those not familiar with it, you notice Mohammed said add a question to a page. The page is the thing with the kind of little gray tab in the upper left there. He dragged from that left palette of possible questions, which include a whole bunch of question types. He dragged that over, and then selecting that question, there, that thing with the sort of orange little tab, he's filling it in. And you notice the properties of, the characteristics of that question are shown there in that right-hand side. Right now it's selecting a page, But as he drags in, now it's gonna be the properties of that particular question. So by selecting something on the canvas area, that area where he's typing right now, it will show an appropriate properties window on the right-hand side there. That's that. Whether it's properties of that particular question, the characteristics of that question, or properties of the page as a whole into which the question is placed. So Mohammed is placing artfully these questions
Not much
on
artfully,
different
just
planes,
rather very
on
quickly.
different pages.
But thanks.
Well, one recognizes the lion by his claw. So he's placing each question here on a different page, and he's doing so he can enable and disable whole pages of content, so that a person who says they do not smoke cigarettes need not be presented with a question, need never see a question about how many cigarettes they see, because it's placed on a page whose criteria make it invisible.
Yeah, so now here, like by default, as I said, it goes from page 1 to page 2 to page 3, and it says that from page 1 go to page 2, and then from page 2 to go page 3, and from page 3, this is the last page, finish the survey. I can say if they choose option no here, change the next page ID to page 3. And if I do that, now if they choose option 1, which is yes, it doesn't change the next page. It remains as whatever is the default, which is go to page 2. But if I choose option 2, answer ID 2, no, it goes to page 3 and skips page 2 completely. And so the participant continues from page 3. And that makes sense, because if we ask them, at the present time, do you smoke cigarettes? They say no, we probably don't want to ask how many cigarettes do you smoke. And as I said, it's probably very similar to similar functionalities that you have in other, you get in other survey systems.
With skip
patterns and branching. Alternatively, the other thing you can do, you can use criteria on a page. I did it this way, but I could have said that no, you also, if they choose no, don't change it, keep it the same. But this page only should be shown if question 3973_3, or for short 3, because question 3 refers to the question 3 of this survey, is equal to 2. So because it's answer 2. Oh, actually no, it's wrong. It has to be 1. Yeah, it has to be 1. So basically means that if they chose 1, show this. Otherwise, go to the next page after this, which is 3.
And 1 is yes.
1 is yes. Yes. I save this.
And is 1 always yes, or?
No, yeah. So I picked it based on this number shown here. So one thing that is that we are actually like working on it within the next 6 months is there is an ID that we use internally right now for criteria evaluation and all of these, and there is a label that's assigned to or there is a variable name assigned to every question that is used heavily for the analysis afterwards. For example, you assign a variable name to this question, and then when you download the data, you expect the data to be from the response to this question to be placed in that variable name. The IDs are, they don't have to be in a certain order. You can see that starts from 3, then it's 3, 4, 5, and the question IDs. And I can bring the 4 here, and now it starts from 4 and then goes to 3 and so on. That doesn't matter. That's just a number, that a unique number Ethica assigns to each question, so it can track it can track that when you say question 4, you refer to this question. This is, at the moment, the interface is a bit confusing because of that, but what you need to keep in mind for the time being is that when we refer to an ID, it's a unique number assigned to every question, and that's not going to change. That's why if you try to actually change this from 4 to any other number, you cannot do it here. You have to download a text file and in that text file edit it, but that can cause.
Right, but I may have misheard, but I had thought, that Erica was also asking something particular to the answers, and so I'll just mention, in a multiple choice question like this, or one with a single answer, I think it's best called, the first answer is possibility 1. The second answer is possibility 2. And that's why when Mohammed set the criteria of page 2,
Sorry, I have to select page 2.
yeah, page 2, it was Q3 equals 1. What that meant is the first answer was given to question 3, that guy there. In other words, whether it was, yes or hello or no, whatever, the first answer was the one given. That's why it said Q3 equals 1, meaning for this survey, the person had given the first answer for question 1. And you could change the order, in which case here you'd need to make it Q3 equals 2.
Yes, I just switched them and now it's this. And I understand that.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
But you don't need the A.
You don't need the A, and that's the that's the other a bit confusing part. We are working on managing it somehow. You don't need the A, but you just put the number 2. And the reason that you actually need Q here, you probably can work on improving this part. The reason that you need Q to refer to that is to differentiate a number. For example, you want to say if the participant's age is 18 versus you want to say if the participant's age is the same as the response to the other question. This Q helps the system to identify that this is a reference, so I have to go and find a question for it, while you don't need an A. It just the system knows that when you say 2, it probably you mean answer 2. We try to keep it very short and very so we said that A is not necessary here, so it doesn't have to be here. But then we realized that a lot of people, very rightfully, they think it has to be A2, which then the system doesn't detect A and it just doesn't work, and the value is too false. Yeah. I'm gonna bring this here. Yeah. So it's this publish. Yes, update. You probably get a lot of notifications that the study has changed. Okay. And the last item here are loop pages, which Shrill is very familiar with. It's actually a very interesting feature here. You basically can ask a page to be iterated once for every response that's given to the previous question. For example, you can say, how many siblings do you have on page 1? And on page 2, you can say, what is the gender of your loop value sibling? And it goes with what's the gender of your first sibling, second, third, and so on, depending on what. For example, if you have said the response to this is 2, the question is that what's the gender of your first sibling? How old is your first sibling? What's the gender of your second sibling? How old is your second sibling? If the question that can be used as what we call it as a loop source can be either a number question or a multiple choice. If it's a number question, it goes once for every from 1 to that number. It can be 0. If it's 0, then this page will not be shown at all. For example, say they respond, how many siblings do you have? 0. The next page will not be asked. If it's a multiple choice question, this page will be iterated once for every response that they provide. For example, I don't know, what fruits do you like the most? Apple, kiwi, and strawberries. And then one for each option that you choose, this page iterates through them. And the loop value here is also another dynamic content that will be replaced by whatever is selected. I believe, for example, here I can say this is a loop page. And I can say the loop question is 4. Of course, this doesn't, I think there is a semantic issue here that we should handle. The question has to be answered before reaching that page. So I probably should add another question here. So for example, a number question, where is it here?
The number of types of tobacco that you consume.
what are the type of tobacco products you use? And
So actually, Mohammed, could it loop over answers? So if you had something that allowed multiple answers to be selected, so like, you know, hookah, cigarette, cigar, chewing tobacco, something like that, could it then loop over the ones to which you said you
cigarettes, chewing tobacco, and so on. Yeah, so we could have, if we say it should loop based on question 6, it then will, the loop value here, I just randomly put it there, it probably doesn't make sense. But the loop value here will be first, second, third, and so on. But if I said it that it should iterate based on responses to question 7, the one above it, then the loop value here would be hookah, cigarette, chewing tobacco, and any other option. So will be that value coming there.
So anyone that you selected.
Anyone that you selected. If you don't select anything, it's 0 selection, so this page will not be shown. There are a couple of
question.
Yes.
So then, for that loop value question, how is the data stored and or presented?
How is data stored is actually a bit different of how it's presented. The stored is still all are bundled within the same question ID. We will look at the Kibana interface. The Kibana interface allows you to actually connect directly to the database and look at the data and see how. And there, you have to be careful when you search. When you say give me all the responses to question. For example, here when you say give me all the responses to question 7 of survey 3973, it gives you multiple documents, as they call it. Each document is for every response they've selected. If they select 0 response, it's 0 documents returned. If they select 3 responses, all 3 of them, 3 documents are returned. That's because it allows you to actually look at the database and see exactly the way that data is stored. The way that's exported and presented, if you export it as CSV, it comma separate all of them and puts them there because we can't create rows for each of them. The third option that we're working on is that if you connect with Stata or SAS or R or SPSS to the system, then it will create a custom database table. That table will have the same, what we call a schema or format as your survey here. And that's why when you connect to that, you will have this as one question, and if people responded to it 4 times, this has one column of that. And if people respond to it 4 times, there are going to be just 4 entries there.
So that's how that loop question would
Would also be, yeah.
Okay.
So. Any other questions? Okay.
Sorry.
Yes.
By having, so for instance, if someone, when you don't have, like when you're asking about what products they use, and you've listed hookah, cigarette, chewing tobacco, and then you don't, and if someone doesn't use, and it means that they would have left it blank.
Yes.
But that, so many times people may not respond to a question because of a variety of reasons. So how do you, by not including, I don't use any of these products, as a response, do you capture the difference?
What we are working on to add is to add exclusive options. To have an option for, I'm not sure if this answers your question, but having an exclusive option, like for example, none of the above, that would be an exclusive option. You could say if they choose this, that's the exclusive option. They can't choose anything else above, and then you can then you would need to exclude that option from the loop question, because loop question still thinks that's a valid loop logic still thinks that's a valid choice and tries to loop over that one selected option. It's an easier setting is an easier way is to add another question above it, and say that, for example, ask, do you use any tobacco products? Yes, no. If they say yes, then show them this question, which of the following? Then if they, whatever they choose, loop based on those responses. The way to do it here would be this. You can say, do you use any, well, I'm using all of these previous ones. So it's probably better to add a new question here. I can say, do you use any tobacco products? The answer is yes and no. And then I can say this question is, where is the option? Disabled by default. You see it's enabled here. I can say no, this is disabled by default. Disabled means that it has to be hidden in the same page. So it's not shown by default on the same page. And you can say if they choose yes, enable question ID 7. Okay. And so that now the way that the flow works is that they first are shown only this question. Of course, assume that these two questions wouldn't exist. Now, I can delete them actually. So the way that it works is it first shows this question. If they choose yes, they see this question right below it in the same page. But then they can choose either of these options, and for these options, they for the any of these options they select here, this page will loop through those options. This is not a good design. It's I strongly suggest to use one question per page, because on the small screen size that they use, it's I even mentioned the enable disable part because it's there, but it's better not to use it. It's better to use branching and put one question in different pages. The system doesn't strictly impose this limitation, not to allow adding more questions to a page, but it's better not to do that because it can make the page a bit hard to follow. You have to keep scrolling and answer to questions in a small screen. But you can divide into two questions basically to answer your question. Does it make sense? Any other question? Okay, I said so many questions that yeah. The only thing that's left is a few final set options here that I just wanted to mention. One is the capture location. We talked about the difference between monitoring GPS data source as a data source that continuously collects it versus monitoring GPS while the person is responding and geotagging responses. If you want to do that, you just have to enable this option. You basically say capture location when the participant is responding to a survey. And for this option, even if they just keep just give the app permission to access GPS while they are in the app, that's enough to geotag all their responses. And the last option here, display responses, allows you to allow participants to see their past responses, modify them or remove them if they want. If you think this is something, if you think it's necessary for participants to be able to view their past responses, you can enable this or you can disable it. Yeah, and the show, I forgot this one, the show progress is another option. It basically says that whether the participant's progress while completing the survey should be shown or not. For example, like this is the two different differences. This shows the page 1 of 12. This just doesn't show anything, just shows the survey content.
So progress can be quite helpful for giving them a sense of how big the task is. One thing that it's not going to magically know is, like, some of those later pages might be disabled based on criteria.
Yeah, it's approximately 12 pages, so it does not exactly that. So it's approximately this many pages. Okay, we are a bit behind, like it meant a bit longer than expected, but that's all I wanted to talk about surveys. If there is any questions, I would love to talk about it. Otherwise, I think the next session is basically just working on the studies that you have in mind. So we have more time to talk about whether any of these components that we have talked since morning. Good? Yes?
So, you said we're getting into the range of the Bluetooth
Beacons?
Beacons later, or?
So as we speak right now, the data is being collected. I suspect if we, I'll talk about the first thing tomorrow morning. I'll talk about this. But if I go and I come here and choose. Well, sorry. Let me see. Study number is 780. I can create I'll explain all of this tomorrow. But what I'm doing right now is that I'm trying to access the ES7. The data for the study that we created, beacon, yes, next step, next pattern, good, come here, for the past 4 hours. So this shows the data that we have got so far from the beacons from different users. We'll look at it a bit later. So what I wanted to say is that already the data is being accumulated by your devices and is being sent. We'll look at them in more detail tomorrow, that how the data looks like. And so far we have got 1,137 beacon records for this study. Yeah, but we will plot them tomorrow and we can just try to make sense of them.
Okay. So a question about just like the range. If you're operating in a smaller space,
Mhm.
I work a lot with clinical settings, and so I might have a lot of overlapping beacons, and just anything you would suggest to kind of parse them out, as in how close do I need to be to say make a connection between two individuals that have been assigned beacons versus a workstation that is larger that has
Yes.
been assigned a beacon with, I don't know, slightly larger strength.
Yes.
And if they're all sitting at the workstation together, that kind of.
So there are two ways to do it. Both will be related. They will use the signal strength.
Mm-hmm.
One is when you're programming this beacon, I simply said that use these 4 numbers, these 3 numbers. One other thing you can say is that use these 3 numbers, but also adjust the transmission power. Basically, how strongly it has to transmit the signal. The stronger you ask for it to transmit the signal, the larger space it covers, the battery drains faster as well. You can, especially if your the place that you're trying to monitor is smaller, you can, to start with, you can set the range to be lower. But there are multiple options. Not that you have ultimate flexibility there. You can say use the lowest setting possible, and still a device from the next room might pick the beacon here. Especially if, for example, you put the beacon on the wall, anyone right across the wall would get a similar reading from the sensor as if you were the other side of the room, because the impact of the wall but being right next to it, the other side, is the same as being far from it on that end of the room, right? You can manage that with filtering the RSSI here while processing the data. For example, you can say, show me only the data that the RSSI value is between, I'm going ahead of myself, but anyway, for example, between -1 to -30, and I talked about that this is a negative value, so -1 is the strongest, -30 is still fairly strong. If I do that, you can see, well, I get none. So probably I just have to increase it a bit more. -60.
You're sure it's not the reverse order?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, it has to. Maybe let me try it. Yeah, maybe I believe it's the reverse order. It's from -60 to -1. Good catch. Yes, thank you. So yeah, 248 readings had this signal strength. I can adjust it and can say, no, I want to only work with the data that have the signal value of -30. It drops to 10.
Okay.
So this is criteria used in analysis, and I think if I'm not mistaken what you were saying earlier, what I've heard from others, for some of the beacons you can program how strong their signal is.
Yes, for all of them you can do that.
And that will also relate to how quickly they chew through their battery
Yes.
as well. And so, you know, you could set it, as Mohammed said, some type of a stronger signal and therefore reach a longer area for a given strength. You might, analyze by, a given threshold, minimum threshold you judge to be a contact, that would reach further out and others would reach less far because they have less power put into, it's like they're yelling less loudly. And both sides are useful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about this tool tomorrow, and we'll talk to start looking at this and also check all the data that are coming in one by one for each data type, how they look, how you can visualize them, and how you can start processing them. That's going to be the basic analysis, just to do a very quick visualization of the data. I think on Wednesday we will talk about how you can create more complex graphs and how you can load it and create in other systems and run more complex analysis on the data. Good. Any other questions?